The most important player on this Penn State football team actually isn't Drew Allar.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So who is the most important player on this Penn State roster? Are the wide receivers even better? And Penn State's latest ranking in the coaches poll has been released. Why they got it right. This is Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, and thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sportsing like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all of its customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Let's begin with who is the most important player on this Penn State football roster, and it is not Drew Allar, it's Abdul Carter. And I would say there are other players on this team that are more important than Drew Allar, and that's not to be disrespectful and say that Allar's performance doesn't matter or that it's not going to affect the offense, but hear me out with this. So Abdul Carter, I think overall is the best player. When we're talking about talent, tangible, intangible abilities, right? Abdul Carter, by and large, should be considered the best player on this team. But then Drew Allar's not next on my list. I would say Kobe King is more valuable to this Penn State team this season, and KJ Winston even, and you hear a common theme here. Those are three defensive players. And then I would say Drew Allar is going to slot in as the fourth most valuable player on this team. Carter's your best player overall. Kobe King is better than people are giving him credit for, and he'll prove it this season. I'm confident he'll be all conference. KJ Winston is obviously another stud. People consider him a future first-round pick. He hasn't missed a tackle in his collegiate career. And why I say they are more valuable than Drew Allar. Sure, Drew Allar might, at the end of the day, have more potential. He might even have a better football career than any of them. But we're talking about the 2024 season. You cannot afford to lose any of these players. And that's not to say that you can afford to lose Drew Allar either. I don't want to see anybody get injured just because I rank them in terms of how valuable they are. But when I think of a lineup that is without Abdul Carter or KJ Winston or Kobe King, that's going to be an issue. Those are impactful players on the defense, especially the versatility that Abdul Carter is going to offer you, where you can have the flexibility to play him either at defensive end or linebacker, that Penn State has that capability now. Kobe King is your best pure, okay, well, Abdul Carter, if he's at linebacker, then yes, he's better than Kobe King. But Kobe King, if Carter's at defensive end, is your best overall linebacker, and I would say is your most capable Mike linebacker. Yes, sure, Tyler Elsdon can be your backup, but then who after that? I don't want to, Kobe King is one of the few, if the only linebacker outside of Abdul Carter when he's playing that position, is a three-down linebacker. I don't really view any of the other three, maybe Tony Brohas, but I still need to see what he can do. But why do I say that Allar isn't as valuable as a Carter, as a King, or as a Winston? And that has to do with the fact that Beau Pribula is on this roster. Beau Pribula is the X factor here. I want to see Penn State use a two-quarterback system. It's not because Drew Allar isn't a good passer or he isn't talented, but this would just open up the offense so much more. And if you were to, knock on wood, I don't want to see the wooden desk. I remind my listeners and viewers, I don't want to jinx anything and say that, Penn State can do without Drew Allar, but you do have Beau Pribula, who's been at Penn State just as long as Drew Allar is. Sure, Drew Allar is the better overall quarterback. He's the better passer. But it's not like Beau Pribula couldn't run this offense. And frankly, a playbook designed for Beau Pribula, I think, would actually work very well and would be comparable to the main part of the offense. Allar's the better passer, but imagine having an offensive system consistently, and I hope to see this from Kotelnicki, where Pribula, Singleton, Allen are all on the field at the same time. Who's getting the football? You essentially have three capable running backs. That dual threat ability from Beau Pribula And Prabula's not afraid to lower the shoulder, right? He's not a finesse runner. I would say he's a power runner in this case. So you have the speedster and Singleton, Allen's your power back, and then just that Prabula can be both. He can be a faster runner as a quarter. He's pretty fast for a quarterback. And then he will lower the shoulder. He's not afraid to take a hit. Kotal Nittany has designed offenses for dual threat quarterbacks in the past. He will do it again. I think a portion of the playbook, the main playbook, will be devoted to having Bo Prabula on the field as the quarterback. Also, a system where Drew Allar and Bo Prabula are on the field at the same time. I think a portion of that playbook will be devoted to Bo Prabula. But Kotal Nittany at Kansas, when Jalen Daniels was available, when Jalen Bean was in at quarterback, it was designed with the intention of a two quarterback system, and that dual threat capability. Allar can run. He's not a statue, but Prabula's obviously the better sprinter here. There's nothing to argue about that. So Drew is important, but I go back to the fact that if you can't afford to lose Abdul Carter for 4 to 6 weeks, or KJ Winston, or Kobe King, as a matter of fact. And I actually stand by that take before or after the news regarding Kavion Keys and Jameel Lyons being removed from the team and from the school. I would actually say this exact same take if we didn't have the situation at the start of training camp here with Keys and Lyons. Because the depth in my mind at defensive end and linebacker wasn't ideal. It was already a little questionable as it is. Hey, you're moving Abdul Carter down to defensive end. What's going on here? And that was a long time ago. That decision was made back in spring football. So the depth was already not great at either position. You lose Curtis Jacobs to the draft, Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac. So now losing 2 more key players on the defense really makes Abdul Carter, KJ Winston, just because he is a talented defender. I know he's a safety, but he essentially will act as an extra linebacker in certain cases on the defense to stop the run, but also be available to defend the pass, right? Penn State, I think the offense will be able to run efficiently and will have strong elements of what Kotal Nittany had done in the past if Bo Prabula had to steer the ship. I don't know who steps up in the absence of an Abdul Carter, of a KJ Winston, of a Kobe King, and gives you that same type of ability. I feel like Bo Prabula would be able to run the offense with his system that's designed for him, and Penn State would still be a capable team week in and week out. It's not that. But I will say, I don't want anybody to take this the wrong way either. If Abdul Carter was out, or King, or Winston, it's not to say that Penn State won't be good week in and week out and won't be a college football playoff contending team. It just gets that much more difficult. And that's my point. You talk about the most valuable players on the team. Those are my top 3, with Drew Allar being the 4th. And Bo Prabula is very important to this season as a whole. Now, what about the wide receivers? How are they important? Because I didn't name any of them as far as my, relative top 4, top 5 players, because the wide receiver room is pretty much the same. I'll explain why on the other side of this break. And today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to its peak performance. You have superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and so much more. Whether you are into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every single time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it is easy to make your car into that MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. That is ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Before we get back to the show, I want to thank all of you for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. For your second listen, you got to check out Locked On College Football. I've been a guest on there. Spencer McLaughlin is your host, talking about everything, talking about the changing landscape of college athletics, previewing the upcoming season that has NIL, the transfer portal, the expanded college football playoff, all of that and so much more. Go check it out. Locked On College Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So I want to give a shout out to Sam before we get to this segment, as he asked me to talk about this topic and commented, perhaps I am over concerned, but as the first game approaches, can you update your assessment projections for the passing game and in particular our wide receivers? So the wide receivers, in my opinion, are going to be slightly better, but they're actually the case is pretty similar to last season. And I know a lot of people are going to be displeased with that. That is a frustrating take, a frustrating assessment. But I will preface with this. Tyler Warren's still there. So when we're talking about the comprehensive passing game, you still have Tyler Warren, who I think is going to be a day 2 NFL draft pick. I think he's taken in next year's draft in the 2nd or 3rd round. Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. Coaches, players have expressed that there is the understanding that Singleton and Allen will be actively utilized more in the passing game. So while the wide receivers haven't exactly improved overall as a group, you have Warren, Singleton, and Allen acting as reinforcements that will help overall with the passing game. And I just got done talking about Bo Prabula and how he can be an X factor to open up this offense more. This offense is going to be dynamic. And it's not going to be, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. You live by the wide receivers, you die by the wide receivers in this case. Scheme will help. Andy Kotelnicki is obviously a big part of this as the offensive coordinator. So there's just going to be more pre-snap motion, movement, deception to confuse defenses, make them second guess, question, and look confused. When I say the wide receiver room is the same, essentially, it's because it is from a talent standpoint. You trade, in terms of numbers, you're actually down players. Dante Cephas, Malik Mega, Keandre Lambert-Smith all entered the transfer portal. And you bring in Julian Fleming. You didn't bring in any other wide receivers. You did actually convert Mekhi Flowers over from the secondary to wide receiver. Mekhi Flowers, good added depth, but not an impact playmaker, at least not right now. So scheme will help. Julian Fleming's leadership, accountability, work ethic, I think will pay off. Something that was missing, something that we gathered as the media, is that Keandre Lambert-Smith and Dante Cephas were looked to as veterans and did not do enough to raise the bar. They did not do enough. And Julian Fleming has already come in, and his impact as a veteran of college football, playing at Ohio State, has been talked about by other fellow wide receivers of what the example is supposed to look like. So from a pure talent perspective, it is the same with the argument to be made that losing Keandre Lambert-Smith, Malik Mega, and Dante Cephas sends you backwards because you subtract 3 and you add 1. But you change the offensive coordinator, Andy Kotelnicki. You change the direction of the wide receiver room in terms of accountability, leadership, mentorship, just by one player alone in Julian Fleming. So your hope is that player morale, work ethic will improve under the direction of Julian Fleming to set that example, and without Keandre Lambert-Smith and Dante Cephas. Here's how the wide receivers are going to look to start. This is the initial depth chart, in my opinion, and we'll get a better understanding as week by week goes through practice, and then ultimately, of course, West Virginia when they show it. Your clear-cut number 1 wide receiver here is Trey Wallace. That one is not up for debate. Trey Wallace is your number 1 wide receiver because the idea was for him to actually eventually surpass KLS and be the number 1 wide receiver. Part of the reason KLS entered the portal in the first place is because he wasn't guaranteed to be the number 1 wide receiver coming back for this season because Julian Fleming entered the transfer portal in the winter window because of Trey Wallace's potential. Injuries derailed his development. Trey Wallace is a former 4-star, just could not stay on the football field a season ago if he is healthy. Best ability is availability. I agree with that statement wholeheartedly. If Trey Wallace is out there, he's the number 1 wide receiver, and there's no one pushing him. Now, of course, they're all going to try to push each other to be better, but there is nobody threatening his playing time, if that makes sense. The Z wide receiver, your number 2 wide receiver, I've already said this before, it is not a guarantee that Julian Fleming is a starter. That doesn't mean that he doesn't play, but Amari Evans, unlike Trey Wallace not having a challenger, if you will, Amari Evans is challenging Julian Fleming for that second spot. The reason is speed. Julian Fleming, capable pass catcher, I'd trust him for short to intermediate throws. As far as stretching the defense over the top, for all that pre-snap motion and movement, the key word is movement, you need speed to do that. That's why Mekhi Flowers moves over to wide receiver, because he has speed. But we're talking about someone that's played wide receiver for a longer time at Penn State, and that's Amari Evans. This Penn State offense needs speed with all that pre-snap movement and with the idea that there's going to be explosive plays. Evans is easily one of the top three fastest players on this team overall. Elliott Washington's in that conversation as well. Nicholas Singleton. But when you talk about players who have the fastest 40-yard dash, are the quickest, Amari Evans better be in that conversation each and every time. He is a top 3 speedster on this team. He gives you that element. What Fleming gives you, I've already mentioned about the leadership and accountability. But as far as an on-field product, blocking, he gives you run blocking. Penn State's not going to be so obvious to where it's Julian Fleming is in. They're obviously running the football. They're not going to do that. And then Amari Evans is in. That means they're going to throw the football. It's not going to be that obvious. Kotelnicki has been doing this for years. But Julian Fleming, part of the reason he was re-recruited to Penn State, he was the number 2 graded Pro Football Focus blocker. Yeah, with the offensive lineman as well, on Ohio State's team a season ago. So if Julian Fleming is that good at blocking, and that's something that Penn State struggled with, wide receivers blocking downfield, Fleming is going to help with the ground game, honestly, more than he might with the passing game. Funny enough, it's funny how that is. So no, he's not an extra tight end. He didn't come in just for his blocking, but I think that overall valuable impact is going to be seen a lot in the ground game, more so at the end of the day than it might be in the passing game. Let's move to the slot receiver, number 3 wide receiver. Caden Saunders and Liam Clifford. This is a toss-up. I think they will split reps, and that's fine. It's kind of the same case. Amari Evans, Julian Fleming. One could be the starter, one might not be. But don't look at it as that. Look at these 5 wide receivers getting involved in the offense and rotating in pretty frequently. Those are your first 5 wide receivers. And this group, again, identical to last year because you have all of the same names. Trey Wallace is expected to take a step forward, but you could compare. Julian Fleming has elements that you like to have on this team, but it's comparable to the fact that you have a capable college veteran. Keandre Lambert-Smith was just that. I think Penn State would have been better off having KLS in the wide receiver room, but he's at Auburn. We hear a good bit about true freshman Tyzer Denmark, but I think he's still a ways away from actually making a true impact. And if I named anybody else, it's just to name them, not because there's no confidence that they can or cannot contribute. It's just they haven't been exactly looked to on the depth chart just yet, or to make that impact. So Anthony Ivy, Tyler Johnson, Mekhi Flowers, as I've mentioned, falling into that category, that veterans that would see an increased role if there were any injuries, but they're not going to be the first ones up. And I don't think Penn State can afford an injury at wide receiver, kind of the same take on the defensive ends or the linebackers here. The matchup versus West Virginia. On paper, Penn State's wideouts are better than West Virginia's secondary. So even though I'm being slightly critical about the situation, saying that the talent level is still about the same here, on paper, there's still, look what Penn State's passing attack did to West Virginia a season ago. And the offense itself is going to be better. Andy Kotelnicki played against West Virginia in 2022, and that Kansas offense put up over 50 points. So on paper, Penn State's situation is still better than West Virginia's pass defense. But when they face better teams, that's my concern, that you could potentially run into some similar issues as last season. And this is where Kotelnicki's play calling and creativity are supposed to pay off. So I hope that answers your questions or concerns about the wide receiver group at this time, as we hear here in early August. When we get more film on them in games, we'll have a better assessment of what they'll be able to do. Penn State is ranked number 9 in the first coaches poll. And I think they got it right. I'll tell you why on the other side of this break. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports and I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games and the sports aren't exactly sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. And all I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. It's that simple. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all of its customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and make the most out of your summer. And if you look over right now on FanDuel.com, you can see lines for the Pirates and the Phillies after a travel day. The Pirates are hosting the San Diego Padres and are underdogs on the money line plus 136 with a total set at 8. And then the Phillies are out on their road trip still against the Los Angeles Dodgers. It's a pretty even game. They are minus 104 on the money line with the total set at 8. If you like those lines, you can bet that and so much more over at FanDuel.com right now. Once again, that's FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So the coaches poll did get it right. Penn State is a fringe top 10 team, per usual. That seems about right. That seems consistent with the theme, at least over the past 5 years or so, excluding the COVID season. And until 2021 went off the rails, that was a top 5 team that I think was overperforming to that point. But here's what the top 10 looks like. Penn State is number 9. Georgia in order: Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, Alabama, Ole Miss, Notre Dame, Michigan. There's Penn State, and then Florida State. Now, I think they can beat Michigan and Notre Dame. I think they match up well against those two teams. I'm not saying they would win every time, but those schools are relatively even. But all those other teams I would take with confidence over Penn State. I'm picking Ohio State over Penn State right now. Georgia, Oregon, Texas, Alabama, Ole Miss. Yes, Ole Miss did very well in the transfer portal, and they returned a lot of players. That has nothing to do with the Peach Bowl, actually. If Ole Miss and Penn State hadn't played each other, and we were looking at this matchup solely with this lens of how they go into this season, Ole Miss is the better football team. So the coaches right now, this is the better takeaway from this. It's not that Penn State is the number 9 team. It's the fact that right now the coaches view Penn State as a college football playoff team. And that's the hope, is that Penn State is able to get into the college football playoff, but they're not hosting here. According to the coaches, this does not get them. So they're in, that's good news, but they are not hosting a playoff game. If this were the basis for the college football playoff bracket, Michigan would actually host Penn State at the Big House in an 8 versus 9 seeding matchup. And then if Penn State were to win, they'd move on to play Georgia in the second round on either New Year's Eve or New Year's Day. And that's really where your season ends right there. I don't know that they have a chance against Georgia. Hypothetically, on paper, those two teams can see a lot of changes throughout the season. But if we're looking at this right now from a preseason point of view, Penn State, I think, would beat Michigan. Yes, even at the Big House. I think they would match up well, just fine with Michigan, win that game, and then move on. And Georgia, I think, would win pretty comfortably in that neutral site game. And, well, not the greatest start to the new year, but Penn State does win a college football playoff game in my mind. That's good. That's a good starting point for Penn State to begin the season. So they get into the college football playoff. In my mind, they win based on the opponent, and then they would get to that next round. You'd like to see them move on to the semifinals, obviously win, but I don't think that this team, especially with the losses that we just talked about, we continue to talk about the impact of that, not having Jameel Lyons and Kavion Keys from an X's and O's standpoint. Penn State, I don't have as much confidence that they can run the table, go through the gauntlet against some of these other powerhouses in college football. Again, they are 10-2, but 10-2, and this kind of the being in the top 10 gets you into the college football playoff. And that's where we will wrap this one up here on Locked On Nittany Lions. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section on anything, how you would rank the most valuable players, the state of the wide receiver room, where you would rank Penn State in your top 10, top 25. I want to know your thoughts. If you're not already, become an everydayer, subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. I appreciate each and every one of you checking out this show. For more Penn State football content, keep it right here on Locked On Nittany Lions. Once again, thanks for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. For your second listen, you got to check out Locked On College Football. From NIL deals to the never-ending conference realignment rumors, Spencer McLaughlin has everything you need in helping you get ready for an exciting college football season. Seriously, it is completely brand new. It's uncharted territory, and Spencer McLaughlin is here to help you get prepared for all of it. You can find the link to Locked On College Football down in the description, so you don't need to search it up, but it is on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. That's Locked On College Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.